fellow Janeites. Today I will be looking at and ranking all of the adaptations of Persuasion that I have seen. For this I will be using the ranking system I have created. There should be something that pops up with a link to the video that I made describing it more in depth, but just really shortly, I divide adaptations into two categories. Classic, period, and other, like modern or zombies, because, you know, comparing a modern adaptation to a period adaptation isn't quite fair, and then within those I rank them numerically. The first adaptation on my list is the 1970s BBC miniseries. For enjoyability, it was decent, and something with her accent just made it sound a little bit like she had a toothache the entire time, which, if you, like me, decided to watch it 6 hours straight, gets a little grating by the end, but, you know, it was a good adaptation. I also felt like they didn't quite make enough changes for the difference in media that it was. When it comes down to it, as much as we would like an exact copy of the book in movie form, there are some changes that have to be made to make it be an enjoyable cinematic experience. And I felt like this one, in its use of language and telling instead of showing, didn't quite make enough changes to accommodate the new media form. Plot events. It was pretty good. It's a mini-series. It has room to be good. I felt like they kind of cut down the presence of the children a little bit. Other adaptations that cut out scenes with children will often add in other ones, which fits with a modern trend of showing characters to be good with kids in period dramas to indicate that they are good people. But I don't know, there are children in Persuasion. More than any other Austen novel, it shows being good with children in a positive, this is a good person light, and this one kind of cut that out a bit. Character. Overall, pretty good. I didn't really like the Anne. Anne is a quiet and reserved person, yes, but she does have some emotional inflection. If you look for it. That's the thing, no one ever looks to see what Anne's emotions are, but like on the walk to Winthrop Farm, Captain Wentworth looks and he sees that she is tired. And at various other points, we see that when characters pay attention to Anne, they can tell that she's feeling unwell. The thing is, they don't look. But the audience is looking, and we need to be able to see what she's feeling in order to fully connect. They have one of the best Captain Wentworths I have ever seen. It's like just the right combination of pride and anger, but still being polite and nice and being handsome and charming, that makes you see Captain Wentworth and why Anne would pine after him for 8 years. So, favorite Wentworth? Their Mr. Elliot is pretty good. He's just the right level of slimy and manipulative that you can see him as a convincing villain, but you can also see why the characters that surround him don't perceive him as such immediately. So, costuming. There is a very good reason why 1830s fashion did not have empire waistlines. It looks bad. it just look up a picture of Anne's walking outfit. It's not good. But looking at some other adaptations that BBC produced at the time, as well as, it's not terrible, and it's consistent. It feels like in world that is an acceptable thing to wear. It would be worse if it wasn't consistent, it was just like, it's perfect, and then every once in a while there's one that isn't as good. But it's all consistently mediocre costuming, which lets you get immersed in the world. Historical accuracy. There wasn't really anything stand out wrong, and nothing really stand out right. There was no point where I looked at the screen and was like, you think someone could get away with doing that in Regency era England? But there was also never any point where I was like, wow, they included that little detail about Regency etiquette. So, you know, average to good. Nothing bad, nothing superb. My final ranking. I would rank this as period, obviously, and a period 4. Definitely on the lower end of 4s, but certain interpretations of characters, inclusion of certain scenes, and also just the fact that it's the only in English miniseries that we have, make it enjoyable to rewatch. So, number 4. The second adaptation on my list is the 1995 Persuasion starring Amanda Root and Ciarán Hinds. In terms of enjoyability, I loved it. It was well placed and pretty, and all the characters were nice, and they included the most important plot events, and it was good. I really enjoyed it. In terms of plot events, they shaved or cut down a few things, like the situation surrounding, spoiler alert, Mr. Elliot's mistreatment of Mrs. Smith. They make that a lot more simple and shorter, but to be fair, they have an hour and 30 minutes, so they've got to cut something. And then the way they use their time is just really good. And then they also cut out the scene where Captain Wentworth rescues Anne from the toddler on her back. But given that that sends essentially the same signal as Captain Wentworth helping Anne into the Crofts' carriage, in perceiving her distress and rectifying the situation, you can see why they could cut it and not lose much. Character. The best Anne I have ever seen, and I've seen a lot. Amanda Root just manages to capture Anne's quietness, but without sacrificing her deep emotions. Another thing with it is that this adaptation didn't really use a lot of makeup or wigs or anything. So Amanda Root had to basically act her way from spinster aunt to essentially getting a second bloom. And it works, and you can see it. It's just wow. I would say that this easily could have the second best Captain Wentworth. Not the best, but, you know, acting next to the best Anne, second best Wentworth makes for a great adaptation. He's very charming, and you can definitely see why Anne likes him. His hair is the main issue. it's a little bit shallow, but there's this one scene at Lyme where he's coming up the steps and the sun shines and reflects off of the little stripe of longer hair in just such a way. Yeah. The supporting cast is pretty strong. I definitely liked their take on Sir Walter and Mrs. Clay. And their take on Lady Russell. You can see her as sort of a friend to Anne, but also older mentor figure. Costuming. As I said before, this adaptation has practically no makeup, 0 wigs, but it still looks so pretty and nice, and is accurate for the most part. The main problem with accuracy is Louisa's hair. She has kind of long bangs. Louisa's hair is the issue with the costuming, and if your biggest issue with costuming is a secondary character's haircut, well, I think you did a pretty good job. Oh, Sir Walter's flower suit. He wears it in Bath, and it's white with orange flowers, which was actually a fashion in some parts at the time. And it just looks so ridiculously horrible and ostentatious on him. It's good. They also do a good job of differentiating Anne through costuming. You can sort of see her wearing simpler, quieter styles throughout most of it, and even later she still wears a bit simpler styles, but it's not so exaggerated that she doesn't look like she belongs with her sisters. She fits in and stands out at the same time, which is just, it's good. Let's see. Historical accuracy. Never at any point in the film did I question if that would be historically appropriate, except for the kiss scene. But you know, kiss scenes in period time, we aren't expecting accuracy with those a lot of the time, and if your big climax is the only point where that's an issue, you've done a good job. Overall, bonus. This one has a bonus. I really like how they showed instead of told. Like, for example, whereas some other adaptations add narration, or Anne talking, or writing in a diary, her reflections after she gets related Captain Wentworth's comment about how he wouldn't have recognized her. Instead, this one just shows Anne sitting in front of a mirror, examining herself. And you can just guess at every little thing that's going through her head in that moment, and she doesn't have to say anything for you to get it. It's beautiful. Beautiful. Overall rank, if you couldn't guess by now, is a period 5. This is the best Persuasion adaptation I've ever seen. My favorite. I've watched it a lot. I own it on DVD. I love it. The next adaptation is a Spanish miniseries from the 70s or 60s. I cannot give a comment on the overall enjoyability of this because I have not been able to find the entire miniseries with English subtitles, and I don't speak Spanish, and I'm not quite that desperate for Austen adaptations to learn Spanish to watch it. So, from what I saw, it was good. Character. From what I've seen, it's pretty good. Nothing stand out great, nothing stand out horrible. They did do a lot of cultural renaming. So just like changing Anne's name to Anna, Elizabeth's name to Isabel, Mary's name to Marie, things that just changing the first name to the Spanish equivalent of the name, which works because that's the audience of a Spanish miniseries. The one renaming I don't really understand is what they changed Frederick Wentworth's name to. They made his name be Michael Trent. Frederick is a Spanish name, so they didn't need to change that. And unlike with the Elliots, where they kept the last name, they also changed the last name, which does make a degree of sense. The name symbolism of Worth that went, of Frederick Wentworth's name, doesn't really transfer into Spanish, but I would have liked it if they had kept one of them the same, so that, I don't know, when watching it, when they first mentioned Michael Trent, I was like, who? There's no Michael in this book. I've read it over 20 times. There's no Michael. Who are you talking about? And then it took me a little bit, and I was like, oh. They changed his name to Michael Trent. And then I was just confused as to why. So, if anyone knows, please tell me. Oh, and if anyone knows where to get the full thing with English subtitles, tell me. Costuming. Not terrible. If I had power over it, I would have made Anne's dresses a little less elaborate. They felt just as elaborate as her sisters, which Anne, as the only one in the family who is taking economies seriously, I feel like wouldn't quite have 3 layers of ribbon on that dress. But, they look nice. One thing that I really liked was the use of Anne's hair in flashbacks. So, as part of telling the backstory between Anne and Michael, they did a flashback. And for that, they had Anne's hair down. Now, normally I would gripe about that, because at 19, Anne would not have worn her hair down. But I did appreciate that I could immediately tell what was a flashback and what wasn't quickly and easily because of a clear visual. So the use of that within the storytelling was very good. As a sentence in my notes, the entire sentence is just eyeliner. There is some intense eyeliner in this adaptation. Historical accuracy. Average to a little bit on the lower end of average is what I would say. Obviously, I haven't seen the whole thing. There could be a really good point that I haven't seen or a really bad point. But from what I've seen, lower end of average. Rank. I'm going to give a preliminary ranking of where I think, based on what I've seen, where it would fit. Of course, that may change as I see more clips of the adaptation and continue to try to find the full adaptation. So, right now I would place it as a period 3. Solid adaptation, not horrible. It was a good watch. I just wouldn't necessarily rewatch it. But as I said, haven't seen the whole thing, not a definitive ranking. Next up, we have Modern Persuasion. Yes, the modern is part of the title. This is one that is not the Netflix one. It's a set in modern day one. So, enjoyability. It was okay. I mean, felt a little stilted at times. They kept coming to mini climaxes, so the plot kind of went up and down, which kind of made the actual climax feel a little weaker. And in terms of PG-ness, I felt like I had to send my little sister out of the room. So, yeah, not the most family-friendly Austen, but it's nothing explicit, but it is kind of strongly hinted. Character. Zilch on keeping names the same, but with what they did in incorporating Persuasion, which I'll get to more later, that kind of makes sense. Anne. Oh, with the name changes, I will continue to refer to the characters as their book names throughout me talking about it, so that you don't have to relearn an entire set of names in 2 seconds. So, Anne, she felt a little more extroverted than I would have gone with, but her character growth was definitely there. Wentworth, I felt like he could have been a bit more charming and putting himself out there than he was, but with some of the adjustments they made, it worked. Plot. So the way that they handled the backstory and showed a lot of it during the opening credits was fairly well done. It's tricky to adapt to modern day. The main driving force of Persuasion is that because Anne is a lady, she could not contact Wentworth because that would destroy her reputation, and Wentworth, because he was resentful, didn't contact Anne. But in modern times, Anne could have reached out to Wentworth without destroying her reputation, and it quite literally says in the book that if she could have, she would have. So, it's tricky to adapt to modern day. Yeah, as I said, the way that it kept on getting mini climaxes made the main climax feel weaker, and it just made the stakes feel weaker. We didn't quite feel like Anne's happiness was at stake as much, because she kept on getting a bit of happiness, and oh no, something happened, and then she got it back, and then oh no. There's a reason that most movie plots follow a simple rising to the climax and then quickly descending, because that engages one's attention and builds the stakes quite effectively, and this adaptation didn't quite get it. Costuming. It was okay. They were wearing modern clothing, so it's a modern adaptation. There was nothing about the costuming that really made me go, ooh, that was well done. I do quite like how they styled Louisa, and the little trick of making Anne lose her suitcase so then she has to wear Louisa's clothes while they're at the Lyme equivalent, which is where Wentworth starts to realize, oh wait, Anne is still attractive. I thought that worked out pretty well. Yeah. Updating to modern day. It wasn't as sloppy as it could have been. It really felt like, though, if you hadn't read the book, you wouldn't be able to follow what was happening. There were several points where they kind of jumped or barely explained something, and so if you've read the book, that's not a problem. You can be like, oh, that character that barely appears for 2 seconds and we're supposed to know the backstory of from 3 seconds of explanation, it's that character from the book. I know who they are. I know what role they're going to play. But without that, you don't quite have that same... I feel like it would have been hard to follow if I hadn't read the book, which brings down how good of a movie it may have been. Bonus. Ooh, wait, before we move on, updating, one last thought. I felt like they tried to shove in a lot of modern movements, social movements into it without really giving much time to any of them. So they just kind of felt tacked on, and depending on the direction society goes, could really date this adaptation, more so than being a modern adaptation. Bonus. An issue that I see run into a lot in modern adaptations is if they should acknowledge Austen's novels or not. Does Jane Austen's writing exist in world? And I quite like how they had Frederick and Anne having read Persuasion together, and then to show both of them not being over it. Anne named her cat Wentworth, and Frederick named his company Laconia. So you can see that connection there, and I thought the way they did that was low-key one of the best parts of the adaptation. Ranking. I'd say it's like a 2, maybe a 2.5. It wasn't a very good movie, but it wasn't a bad movie. Well, it kind of was a bad movie. Out of the modern adaptations of Persuasion that we have, which is like 2, it's the better one. I just didn't quite feel like that they took every opportunity they could have, or adapted it in such a way that a modern audience who hadn't read Persuasion could follow it, which ultimately cuts down on one of the main advantages of a modern adaptation. Alright, so next up we have the 2022 Netflix adaptation of Persuasion. I have a video that I made where I go more in depth into what I think of specific characters and choices that they made, which should, if I can figure out how to do this, pop up somewhere. But I'm going to give you a shorter version right now. Enjoyability. If you view it as a fanfiction Hallmark mashup with some Austen thrown in for flavor, you can enjoy it. It just, I feel like in a lot of the marketing, it was marketed as a period drama, very much so. So then the more modern elements they added didn't fit with expectations. Character. Inaccurate. There are maybe 3 characters in this. 4 that are accurate to the book. Coming up with Anne. Anne is so they made her an extroverted, drunk, socially inept person. Like, Anne Elliot is, in the book, is quiet and responsible and kind of shy. Whereas here she's boisterous, says the wrong thing at the wrong time, and just, she doesn't feel like Anne at all. As an introvert, I love Anne's introvertedness, and I love seeing it and relating to it, and this just, don't make Anne drink alcohol, please. Wentworth was also inaccurate. They didn't quite capture the fact that Wentworth, even 8 years later, is still kind of angry at Anne for breaking off their engagement, which shows he still cares. But here he just kind of felt like a mopey, drowned puppy, rather than the charming sea captain back to show Anne how over her he is. Which makes him not feel like Captain Wentworth. You can make him be sad and mopey in Bath, but you need to earn that first by showing us why Anne was in love with him for 8 years of no contact. Louisa Musgrove. They made her be oddly perceptive. Like she asked Anne if Anne would be okay with her pursuing Wentworth because she noticed that there was something between them. Which just raises some weird questions, like if Louisa can tell that there's something between them, why is she going after him? Do you really want to go after someone who you think likes someone else? It just didn't, it was a nice idea, it just was not executed in a way that worked. I loved what they did with Mary. They made her feel like a mix of Elizabeth and Anne, or Anne as she is in the book, more so than any other adaptation. And their Mr. Elliot is more explicit in his slyness, but the way they did it, it worked. Plot. This movie is a lesson in why teachers tell you to not rely on the SparkNotes plot description. The things from the novel are fairly well executed. The issue is that they cut out a lot of things from the novel and then replace them with unnecessary swimming and bathing scenes. And they have Anne and Frederick almost get to the point again and again. They nearly have the conversation that will get them back together, and then they don't, which just really kills the tension. Because you're constantly like, but you were 2 words away from being back together. You idiots. Just, why do I care? They are not back together because they didn't say 2 words repeatedly. There are 2 instances of this, and it's just like, save the climax for the climax. Costuming. It was terrific, except for Anne. Anne, they were trying to make her seem ahead of her time by giving her more modern pieces, but ultimately that just makes her not fit in with the world, and it's not like even consistent. There's 1940s fashion. There's black fishnet gloves. There's a modern looking shirt thing pulled over a dress. It's not consistent. It's not consistent with the world. And some of the pieces, like the linen shirt thing pulled over the dress, look bad. They don't look good. Not all of them look good. The black fishnet gloves, among other things, don't make sense character-wise. And like the 1940s one, they just really stand out in a way that makes her feel like she isn't a part of the community, which she is. She's an often overlooked part, but she is deeply ingrained in the community. Historical accuracy. It was bad, but it wasn't trying to be good. It was very intentional in its use of modern words and phrases and ideas. So, well, I found it jarring, and every time it happened, I just got sucked out of the Regency world. It wasn't intentional. So, it's not that they didn't do their research and see what was Regency England etiquette. They just chose to ignore it. Which some people have reported liking and being able to understand better. I personally did not like it. Rank. I'm putting this one as a period 2. If they had gone all the way and made this a modern adaptation, it could easily have been the best modern adaptation. And easily been a 3 or perhaps a 4. But the flip-flopping between completely period, completely modern, they didn't quite successfully integrate the two together, and so it feels like 2 movies that were spliced together. From reading the reviews, I know that some would place this as a 1, asking if this is the worst Jane Austen adaptation ever. Have they seen the Billie Piper Mansfield Park? There is no question what the worst Jane Austen adaptation ever is. Not at all. Next up, we have the 2007 Persuasion. In terms of enjoyability, it was pretty good. It wasn't standout terrific, but it was good. I enjoyed it. I've watched it more than once. It was good. Character. I never really felt like they had the best characterization of anyone, but I feel like they had second best in a lot of them. So for example, the Anne. She was pretty good. Her breathiness did get a little on my nerves at various points, but otherwise was fairly accurate. However, they do make her more athletic, but, you know, other than that, it's pretty good representation of Anne. The Wentworth is easily third, maybe second best. He's good. You can see his charmingness, and you can also see his devotedness to Anne. He's good. Plot. So they made 1 or 2 changes that I felt were unnecessary. Like making Anne fall off at the end of the log on the walk to Winthrop Farm felt a little bit excessive, and then why Wentworth just walked off after that, it didn't quite make sense. And making Anne run a 5K around Bath. Anne gets tired out by a walk to Winthrop Farm. I feel like running around Bath would not be her first go-to. She would have, after finding the Crofts, stuck with them because Wentworth is literally staying in their house. So then that could have been an easy way for her to get to run into him and maybe pay another little nod to the deleted chapters or the original version of the proposal scene, and not make Anne keep running so that she's out of breath for the final part of the proposal. Costumes. There were a couple of them that I felt like weren't quite tailored right, but on the whole, it was historically accurate. It made sense character-wise. Anne was noticeably different from her siblings, but didn't really stick out an outrageous amount. So yeah, decent costuming. Historical accuracy. There were one or two little hiccups, but on the whole it was pretty good. Period. So, rank. This is obviously a period film, and I would put it at level 4. It's pretty good and is consistently at or above average in terms of character and plot. But there were just a few little things that I personally feel like keep it from being up in level 5 with the 1995 adaptation. The last one on the list is another one that I have not seen the entirety of because there isn't an entirety of it to see. It's called Rational Creatures. It's a web series adaptation of Persuasion that ended at about the time where Anne would have been staying at Uppercross in the book. So yeah, I'll say what I think from what there is and where I'd put it. Maybe it would have gotten better or worse as it went on. We don't know. Enjoyability. I just wrote the word meh here. It's unfinished, so it could have gotten better, but I'm not entirely upset that it didn't get finished. So, yeah. Character. The writing around the characters was pretty good. I felt like the acting wasn't quite up there to do the characters justice. Plot. It's unfinished. They didn't really make any huge deviations from the basic plot of Persuasion, and it didn't really look like they were going to from what we could see. So, okay, but we don't know where it would have gone. Costuming. Nothing spectacular. It does seem to be definitely a lower budget production. So that isn't entirely surprising, but at the same time, for example with Lizzie Bennet Diaries, most of the cast wore their own clothing for most of the show. So I feel like they could have done something more than they did. But they're wearing modern clothing. Wow! It fits with the time period it's set in. That brings us to updating. They stopped early on, so we don't know how well they would have updated some things later on. But they did a decent job. It felt like the circumstances within it felt like they could have conceivably happened in real life. Rank. Other 1. It could easily further on as the actors got more comfortable in their roles and as they got to the more interesting parts of the story, could have easily moved up to a 2. However, I just feel like the acting isn't quite there yet, and it just wasn't all that great. Has the potential to have been a 2, but it ended too soon to get there. That concludes my ranking of all the adaptations of Persuasion that I've seen or seen parts of. Let me know down in the comments if you agree or disagree with any of my rankings, and Also, what to you makes an adaptation sparkle? If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, or subscribe. I'll try to get back into posting more regularly. Yeah. Until next time, run mad as often as you choose, but do not faint.